Berlin, 1939. Berlin, 1939. A printing press runs at 3 a.m. inside a guarded SS facility. It is not printing propaganda, it is not printing orders, it is printing British pounds, 134 million of them, so perfect that the Bank of England cannot tell the difference. Fast forward to 1945. The Allied forces pull wooden crates from the bottom of Lake Toplitz in the Austrian Alps. Inside, waterlogged bricks of the most accurate counterfeit currency ever produced in human history. How did Nazi Germany, a nation that preached racial purity and moral supremacy, secretly become the greatest counterfeiting operation the world has ever seen? And here is the part nobody tells you. Hitler did not do this out of desperation. He did it because a Jewish economist, sitting in a concentration camp, told him it would work. If you want to understand how wars are really funded, stay with us. And if you're new here, subscribe. Because this channel goes where the textbooks refuse to go. The crisis. To understand Operation Bernhard, you first have to understand how completely, catastrophically broke Nazi Germany was before the war even began. When Adolf Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933, Germany was suffocating. Unemployment stood at 6 million, roughly 30% of the entire workforce. The National Treasury held foreign currency reserves of less than 800 million Reichsmarks. That sounds like a large number until you realise Germany needed a minimum of 3 billion Reichsmarks just to cover 1 year of essential imports: food, raw materials, oil. Germany was not poor. Germany was insolvent. There is a critical difference. A poor country has no money. An insolvent country has assets but cannot pay its bills as they come due. Germany had factories, engineers, roads, and ambition. What it did not have was the foreign currency to buy what it needed from the outside world. Historian Adam Tooze, in his landmark 2006 work The Wages of Destruction, documents this with devastating clarity. By 1936, Germany's foreign exchange crisis had become so severe that the Wehrmacht, Hitler's own military, was being rationed on rubber, copper, and aviation fuel. Goering's air ministry was told it could not build the number of aircraft it needed because Germany could not afford to import the aluminum. Think about that. The most militarized nation in Europe, spending 17% of its GDP on rearmament by 1938, could not buy enough aluminum to build its own air force. Hitler's solution, publicly, was the 4-year plan announced in 1936. Goering was put in charge. The plan was to make Germany self-sufficient within 4 years. It largely failed. By 1939, Germany was still importing 33% of its raw material needs per wartime economic records. So Hitler needed foreign currency. Hard currency, British pounds, American dollars, Swiss francs, the kind of money that could buy oil from Romania, tungsten from Portugal, ball bearings from Sweden, all the things that keep a war machine running and that no amount of Reichsmarks could purchase on international markets. The conventional answer was trade and exports. But Britain and the United States were watching Germany's rearmament with growing alarm and quietly tightening economic pressure. So Hitler authorised a different answer entirely. This is where Reinhard Heydrich enters. The mechanism / the wizard. Reinhard Heydrich was not a man who wasted time on problems he could not solve. Head of the Reich Security Main Office, architect of the final solution, described by Hitler himself as the man with the iron heart, Heydrich operated at the intersection of ruthlessness and cold technical efficiency. In 1939, he authorised a plan that had been quietly circulating inside SS intelligence circles since at least 1936, Operation Andreas. The goal was simple and audacious: flood Britain with counterfeit currency so convincing and so overwhelming that the British pound, the world's reserve currency at the time, the dollar of its era, would collapse entirely. Not invade Britain, not bomb Britain, destroy Britain's economy from the inside using paper and ink. Here is how it worked. The SS identified that the British pound, for all its prestige, had a fundamental technical weakness. The Bank of England produced its notes using a specific blend of linen and cotton fibre, with a unique watermark. The printing used a process called intaglio, where ink is pressed into recessed lines, giving the note a slightly raised texture you can feel with your fingertip. This tactile quality was the primary anti-counterfeiting measure the Bank of England relied upon. The SS believed that if they could replicate the paper, the watermark, and the intaglio printing, they could produce notes indistinguishable from genuine ones. But they needed an expert. And this is where the story takes a turn that Nazi ideology made almost impossible to acknowledge. The best man for the job was a Jewish graphic artist and master forger named Salomon Smolianoff, known as Solly, who was sitting in a concentration camp. Here is where it gets interesting. The SS pulled Smolianoff out of the camp system, brought him to a special barracks at Sachsenhausen concentration camp, and told him to replicate the British pound. If he succeeded, he would live. The same offer was extended to approximately 142 other Jewish prisoners, skilled printers, engravers, bank clerks, paper specialists, and chemists, all selected from the death camp system because they possessed technical skills the SS needed and could find nowhere else. Imagine you are Salomon Smolianoff. It is 1942. You have survived selections, starvation, and the systematic murder of people around you. Now an SS officer slides a British £5 note across a table and says, "Copy this perfectly, or go back." You have no leverage, no freedom, and no illusions about what going back means. But you also understand something the SS officer does not. If you succeed too quickly, your usefulness ends. If you fail completely, your usefulness ends. The only path to survival is to succeed slowly, brilliantly, but slowly. Now, Smolianoff and his team were given Block 19 at Sachsenhausen. They had proper food, a surreal contrast to the starvation rations outside their barracks walls. They had professional printing equipment. They had time, and it took them until 1942 to crack the paper formula. The Bank of England's specific linen-cotton blend required months of chemical analysis and repeated failure. Getting the watermark right required handcrafting a custom mould. The intaglio printing plates took individual engravers working with magnifying lenses for weeks on a single denomination. The modern analogy here is precise. This was the World War II equivalent of a state-sponsored deepfake operation. Just as modern adversaries use AI to generate synthetic media so convincing that fact-checkers struggle to identify the forgery, the SS was producing synthetic currency so convincing that the Bank of England's own examiners were fooled. By late 1942, Operation Andreas had officially become Operation Bernhard, renamed after SS Major Bernhard Kruger, who now ran the program directly. And what they produced next would force the Bank of England to make a decision it had never made before in its 250-year history. The scheme in action. The first test batch of counterfeit British £5 notes was passed through neutral Switzerland in early 1943. The notes went to Swiss banks. The Swiss banks submitted them to verification channels. They passed. This was not a small test. This was the SS running a quality control check on the global financial system, and the global financial system failed the test. With confirmation that their forgeries were undetectable, Operation Bernhard shifted into mass production. Between 1942 and 1945, the prisoners of Block 19 produced approximately 8.97 million banknotes, with a combined face value of £134.6 million per British parliamentary records and post-war Allied investigations. At 1943 exchange rates, that was equivalent to roughly 9 billion Reichsmarks, more than 10 times Germany's entire pre-war foreign currency reserves. The SS did not simply stockpile this money, they deployed it through a carefully constructed laundering network. In 1943, the SS used counterfeit pounds to pay Friedrich Schwend, a con artist, black market specialist, and SS agent, to build a distribution network across occupied Europe and neutral countries. Schwend operated out of a villa in northern Italy, and through a web of middlemen, black market dealers and corrupt officials, he converted the fake pounds into real goods and real foreign currency. Here's the date to consequence chain that shows you the scale. January 1943, first confirmed deployment. January 1943, first confirmed deployment of Operation Bernhard notes through Schwenn's network in Spain and Portugal. Both countries were officially neutral, but were critical suppliers to Germany. Portugal provided tungsten, essential for armor-piercing ammunition. The fake pounds bought real tungsten. Real tungsten went into real bullets. Mid-1943, SS intelligence used Operation Bernhard funds to finance agent networks across the Middle East and North Africa. British counterintelligence later estimated that several key intelligence operations were part-funded through counterfeit currency without their knowledge, per post-war MI5 declassified files. Late 1943, the operation's most audacious single act. The SS used Operation Bernhard funds to finance the rescue of Benito Mussolini from Gran Sasso, the daring September 1943 glider operation that extracted the deposed Italian dictator from a mountaintop prison. The operational budget ran in part through Schwenn's counterfeit network. The most famous commando raid of the entire war was partially bankrolled by fake British money produced by Jewish prisoners in a concentration camp. By 1944, the Bank of England was receiving enough suspicious reports from banks across Europe to know that something was wrong. The volume of £5 notes in circulation in neutral countries was statistically impossible given wartime British printing schedules. In early 1945, the Bank of England took the extraordinary step of withdrawing all pre-war series banknotes from legal tender, an action it had not taken in its entire history since its founding in 1694. Every British pound note issued before a certain date was declared worthless. Every bank across the world had to submit its holdings for verification. The disruption to post-war British monetary reconstruction was significant and lasting. But the Bank of England's decision revealed something even darker. To make that announcement, they had to quietly admit that they did not know how many of the notes in global circulation were genuine. The counterfeiting operation had worked well enough to make the real currency untrustworthy. The dark side, it gets worse. Here is what the post-war accounts sanitize out of the story. First reveal. The prisoners of Block 19 knew exactly what they were doing and what it meant. Several survivors, including Adolf Berger, a Slovak Jewish printer who wrote his memoir The Devil's Workshop in 1983, described a deliberate strategy of sabotage hidden inside compliance. The prisoners would introduce microscopic imperfections into certain print runs, not enough to fail SS inspection. Just enough, they hoped, to give Allied banks a technical basis to detect the notes if they knew what to look for. They had no way to communicate this to anyone outside the camp. They were sabotaging a counterfeiting operation using tools invisible to their captors. An act of resistance so subtle it could not even be proven it was resistance. But here is the brutal irony Adolf Berger recorded. The sabotage failed. The notes were still too good. British banks still passed them. Second reveal. The scale of Operation Bernhard extended far beyond pounds. By 1944, the SS had ordered Block 19 to begin replicating American dollars. The dollar operation, which never reached full deployment before Germany's collapse, had already produced test batches that were submitted through the same Swiss verification channels used for the pounds. According to post-war interrogations of SS Major Bernhard Kruger himself, the dollar forgeries passed initial bank inspection at a rate he described as entirely satisfactory. Had the war continued another 18 months, the United States dollar, the currency that would become the backbone of the post-war Bretton Woods system, may have faced the same crisis as the British pound. The global financial architecture of the post-war world almost rested on a foundation the SS had already begun to undermine. Third reveal. When Germany collapsed in May 1945, the SS did not destroy the evidence of Operation Bernhard, they dumped it. On the direct orders of SS leadership, the printing plates, equipment and remaining banknote stocks, worth hundreds of millions in face value, were loaded onto trucks and driven to the Austrian Alps. Some was buried, most was thrown into Lake Toplitz and Lake Grundlsee. In 1959, a West German diving expedition recovered crates containing £21 million in counterfeit British notes from Lake Toplitz. In subsequent decades, additional recoveries brought the total to over £50 million in face value still physically intact at the bottom of Austrian lakes, nearly 80 years later. The rest, distributed through Schwenn's network spent across neutral Europe, deposited in banks from Lisbon to Istanbul, was never fully recovered. Its exact location remains unknown. Some of it, statistically, is likely still in circulation today, in private collections or forgotten estate boxes, indistinguishable from genuine notes of the same era. The forgeries outlasted the forgers, they outlasted the war, they may outlast everyone alive who knows their history. The collapse/verdict. Operation Bernhard did not win the war for Germany, but the reason it failed is not what you expect. It did not fail because the forgeries were detected. It failed because Germany collapsed before the operation could reach strategic scale. The pound operation was working. The dollar operation was coming. The infrastructure for economic warfare at a level the world had never seen was fully functional inside a concentration camp barracks, and Germany ran out of war before it could deploy it completely. The counterintuitive verdict: Operation Bernhard did not fail as a technical operation. It failed as a strategic gamble because the regime that conceived it was already destroying the industrial and military capacity it needed the operation to save. The same ideology that provided the slave labour for Bloc 19 also produced the catastrophic strategic decisions that guaranteed Germany's defeat. The counterfeiting worked. The war was already lost. Here is how to understand what happened in three pillars. First, Germany's economic desperation was structural and self-inflicted. Hitler's rearmament program consumed the foreign currency reserves that could have bought stability. The counterfeiting operation was not a genius solution. It was a symptom of the impossible economic contradiction at the heart of the Nazi project: wage total war without the economic foundation to sustain it. Second, the human cost of the operation was a moral obscenity that sits beneath the technical ingenuity. 142 Jewish prisoners were kept alive specifically because their skills were economically useful to the system that was simultaneously murdering their families. Adolf Berger survived the war. Salomon Smolianoff survived the war. Others in Bloc 19 did not. The SS transferred prisoners who showed signs of illness back into the general camp population, which was a death sentence, to protect operational security. The operation's survival rate was better than the surrounding camps. That is the full extent of its mercy. Third, the long-term damage to British monetary credibility was real and underappreciated. The Bank of England's 1945 note withdrawal and reissuance programme cost significant administrative resources during a period when Britain was already economically exhausted by 6 years of war. The psychological damage, the knowledge that the world's reserve currency had been successfully faked at industrial scale, quietly accelerated discussions that led to the Bretton Woods Agreement, making the US dollar, not the British pound, the anchor of the post-war international monetary system. Operation Bernhard did not cause this shift, but it was one more weight on a scale that was already tipping. The printing presses of Bloc 19 went silent in April 1945. The men who ran them, some of the most skilled craftsmen in Europe, kept alive by their usefulness to the machine that sought to destroy them, were marched toward the lakes, told to dump the evidence, and then marched onward as Germany dissolved around them. The last thing Salomon Smolianoff did before liberation was not celebrate. According to Berger's account, he sat down and asked a question that no one around him could answer. Who was going to pay for what had been done? 79 years later, we are still working that out. Here is the question I want you to answer in the comments. If Operation Bernhard had been deployed at full scale 2 years earlier, with both pounds and dollars flooding neutral markets simultaneously, could economic warfare alone have forced Britain to the negotiating table? Or does this story prove that no financial weapon can substitute for a coherent military strategy? Tell me what you think. The most interesting answer gets pinned.